Good morning, Anne.
Good morning, James.
And good morning, everybody. Thank you again for tuning in and listening. I hope you are all having a wonderful weekend or a wonderful week whenever you're listening to this. This is our fourth episode, our fourth attempt at putting together our new podcast series. We're finding our feet slowly. What we do know is that all of the feedback so far, suggestions, ideas, questions, has been really helpful. It honestly has. So thank you. Genuinely thank you for all of the wonderful feedback and encouragement and constructive ideas moving forward. We take all of it on board and we're doing our best to make this as enjoyable, informative and as interesting for you and for us as possible. Yes, I think that's as good an intro as we're going to get this morning, Anne. What do you think?
Okay.
Happy to go?
Yes, very happy.
Okay, let's go.
I'd like to go back
Okay.
to podcast 2. In podcast 2, the podcast itself finished abruptly.
Yes. It wasn't intentional. I know a number of you picked up upon that, but it wasn't intentional.
Yes, I understand that. And it finished, when it finished, we were talking about the moon, the mission to the moon. And I'd like to go back to that because there was a certain part of it that you didn't get. So I'd like to just finish that last little part that we were doing. And it was about the relationship with the Apollo mission and our smartphones today. Could you give them the numbers, James, that we had, or what you were saying?
Okay, so if you haven't listened, this is in reference to the episode 2, and it was various topics, the importance of books, which led on to myself bringing up that for many of us who have, pretty much everybody in terms of modern society, a version of a smartphone or a smart device, particularly the smartphones that we all have in our pocket, our back pocket, our rucksack or handbags, that they have more computing power, more processing power within them than the Apollo mission to the moon, which was over 50 years ago now. And it's something like over 100,000 times processing power. So the computing power is something like over 100,000 times. So it's not just more, it's not just a lot more, it's considerably more. I mean, it really is quantum leaps technologically further forward in its computing power. And when you look at the actual size of the device and the processor that's within it, it really is, in many ways, unfathomable in terms of the power in processing terms and the journey and how quick that journey has been from something like a spaceship, a rocket, taking off of Earth to the moon, and that power over 100 times more powerful processing wise being in our pockets, next to our beds, and our children using as well. Different people, many children use these smartphones. So it's quite staggering. I feel so anyway. I feel that that's staggering. And I presume that you find it interesting, engaging, staggering, concerning. I don't know which adjective you would use, Anne, but you brought it up again. So what are your thoughts?
I find it concerning. I know nothing about computers or smartphones. Technically, I don't know. I know how to use one, obviously. But technically, I don't know anything about them.
I'll be honest, I don't particularly know much about the technical side of smartphones or computing power at all, to be honest.
It's not that part that bothers me.
Yes.
What bothers me is that if it's got that much computing power...
Yes.
If the phone is on, this is only my concern. It doesn't need to be anybody else's concern. If that phone is on in the bedroom or in your pocket or when people are eating, they've got the phone out, even though they're not using it, the power is on, surely that computing power must still be going through the wavelengths and through each individual's phone.
I don't know in terms of technicalities. I'm not an expert in this area. I do know that having in lay terms, having a smartphone or a smart device on your person, it does emit a level of radiation. I don't know if that's directly correlated to the processing power, but it's certainly in correlation to the processing power. So I don't know in terms of absolute specifics, but there are various studies that are looking into the potential harm of the radiation of smartphone devices, as well as other types of handheld technologically devices or devices that we have on our person or close to our persons, how it affects the physiology of our bodies, how it affects us mentally, and how it's interfering or affecting on a cellular level. So there are lots of areas that are unknown, and there are lots of studies that are taking place. I think it would be fair to say, with a level of caution, but with a level of in terms of certainty, a soft certainty, that there is evidence that it's detrimental to our human health, that having these devices so close to us is not necessarily helpful and looking like it is having a detrimental effect on our health. That's on our physical health, but also on our mental, emotional health as well, in terms of our engagement with them and how it's reconstructing our biochemistry, how it's reconstructing and changing the way we think, both in terms of our thought patterns, but also the literal brain chemistry and the chemicals that are working within the human body, how it's akin at times to addiction and other facets of human behaviour that are dangerous and detrimental and harmful to a human being.
So if I take that a step further into my own knowledge of the human body and the energy field of the human body, because we are all, as with your phone, we're all energy and we're all receiving wavelengths. My concern is that those wavelengths do distort. So if we're, even with music, if we have music and music is very, very loud, it affects us. If music is soft and calming, that affects us. It affects us mentally, but also physically, because we can get agitated with music.
Yes.
So I don't understand why this isn't all coming together as one, in the knowledge that it has to have much more research done into these iPhones than is being done at the moment. I know there's a lot being done, but I don't think it's commuted to the parents of children who are using these phones.
It's not communicated.
Communicated, yeah.
Well, as always, without wanting to be too cynical about it, but I think in terms of being realistic, there's an enormous amount of money that's involved in the cutting edge technology, and consumers, us, buy these devices and money talks. So I feel that has a huge impact on how quickly information is shared in certain areas and to what end, because there's so much money wrapped up in cutting edge technology, particularly handheld devices such as smartphones being the most popular one. I mean, it really is an enormous industry worth trillions of pounds, dollars, euros and other currencies around the world. It's astronomical how much money is involved and how many people actually participate in purchasing them. So human behaviour is dictating that market.
Well, when you think that...
I'm not saying I agree
No.
with that, and I'm not saying that I think that that's a positive path forwards, but being realistic about it today, that's the path that the vast majority of human beings on planet Earth are, at least to some extent, engaged with and continuing to be engaged with. And that is a point of reflection, and we're included in that as well. And I'm sure the vast majority of the people listening this morning, I'm making a presumption, forgive me if I'm incorrect, but I would presume that to a level you're involved in purchasing and using and having a relationship with forms of smart technology in your life as well.
Not as much as most people, I must admit, but I'm using technology at the moment and a smartphone. So yes, and it does have its advantages in certain areas. But the more we progress, or we seem to, or in my opinion, the more we progress, the more we seem to go backwards in many ways. I look at the cost. So you were talking about cost.
Yeah.
You were talking about cost before, and how how much money is being made. I look at the size of the smartphone, and I don't know. I would imagine it costs very little in comparison to the price we pay for that phone to be made.
Again, I don't have that information, but there will be margins within each handset, of course. Yes. Otherwise, the whole industry wouldn't be profitable.
That's what I'm saying. So I look at this smartphone, and I recently had to change mine because the battery was going, as on most of them it goes. But I didn't realise they were costing £1,000 for an Apple phone. Never entered my head. Because I pay it monthly, which most people do, I don't think we really look at the actual cost of the phone. Now, when I got married in 1958, and we bought our first house in 1959, we bought our first house, and that was a Victorian terrace, and that was £750. No, £720
for the whole house.
For the whole house was £720.
Wow.
So when you look at that in comparison to today, it's crazy that
well, you have to add in inflation and the value of money in comparison to wages. So there is an element of that as well. So £750 in 1958 comparatively would be of more value than £750 of today's money.
I know.
So there is that to factor in.
I'm not talking about it in that way. What I'm talking about is that technology. I hear people say,
yes,
I can't afford to buy a house, or I can't afford to do A, B or C.
Yes.
And yet we can afford to spend
extravagant amounts
on a phone.
I think
is it necessary? That's all I'm thinking.
No, I don't think it is necessary. I mean, there is an argument to be made that to participate in first world technocentric society, of which most people to a level are involved in, you will need to have access to the internet because of jobs, because of banking, because of communication. That's generally how the system is set up at the moment to be engaged with that. It's very difficult to participate in wider society in the first world that's technocentric if you are completely, disengaged and disconnected from that. And I'm not saying that's wrong or bad at all, any more than I'm saying that people have to participate in it. We're having this discussion because we started out by recognising that it's potentially a point of concern in certain ways, and is enough of that research in terms of its findings being communicated to us all, and particularly to parents when parents are giving it to their children. That seems to be our thread in here. Is that correct, Dan? Is that our line of thinking in here?
It's my line of thinking. I think I'm more in the moment at the moment. I'm more on a very basic level with it, because I've renewed holiday insurance this week, and all I kept getting was I had to go online, had to do it by email. Now, I don't like using things by email. And many elderly people don't even have a computer or don't have an email address. And trying to find a phone number is very, very difficult.
Yes.
Then, once I've got the phone number and I ring, I had to wait half an hour to be connected to the company. Once I was connected, the lady I dealt with was very, very good, and took probably 10 minutes at the most to deal with my query, sort it out, the holiday insurance is done, and I came off the phone. So for that 10 minutes, I myself had wasted probably an hour and a half.
It's really poor business, isn't it? In terms of customer service, it's really, really poor business, and it's obviously a business decision from a majority of businesses now to lead people, almost force people to use online processing in terms of whether it's filling in forms, giving information, or even communicating with a bot now in terms of a chat room bot, an AI bot, a robot essentially, algorithmic intelligence in terms of not a human being. And the hurdles that are put in place if you want to speak to an actual human being. And you're right, I'm sure the experience of you all listening, whether it's to do with banking or holidays, returning something, finding out information, any kind of service in any way where you're phoning up, you have to go through quite often 10, 15 minutes of listening to an automated service tell you about what options to press, the vast majority of which is completely unnecessary, talking to you about terms and conditions of which you've already signed up to, otherwise you wouldn't have the product or the service in the first place, reminding you of certain factors and then telling you if you want things done quicker, you can go online and you can do it now. So everything is set up to discourage and stop people actually speaking to another human being. And it's hard not to be cynical about that. Now, what is that about? And quite often, I can only imagine it's an economic decision to begin with, that businesses are thinking that it's cheaper to have a machine speak to a human being, or a human being not even phoning up in the first place, just going online and engaging and interacting with any transaction online, rather than paying somebody to be in a call centre or to actually be public facing. Now, the problem with that is that if we continue on that track, we're not going to have very many human-to-human engagements, human-to-human interactions. We're going to have human-machine interactions. And again, I'm not saying that's wrong, but it is a question of, is this who we are and is this where we want to go? Do we want this technocentric society? Do we want technology not only a part of our society, but literally in the centre of our society, of which everything we do, from the food we eat to the medicine that we take, to the education of our children, to the money that we save, to the employers and the employment of which we're engaged with, to family, to friends, to everything now is touched by technology in a deliberate and primary way. And are we comfortable with that? And if the answer is yes, then we continue right ahead. And that might be the path, that might be the wise decision. But if the answer is no, or if there is a hesitation, or if we're looking at putting some safeguarding in there, or if we're looking at least mediating how we do this, putting some level of wisdom in there, then we have not got much long. We haven't got much longer left, much time left before we can change the course that we're on here, because it's accelerating so quickly. Point being, where we started this conversation, I've got very passionate now, Anne, because this is something that really moves me, because it's a deep concern to me, because it's very clear that this is happening. That we started off our conversation with a point to do with how fast it's moved in over 50 years since the Apollo mission to the moon. And it's 100,000 times more computing power in the modern cutting-edge smartphones, not even necessarily the up-to-date models, not even the up-to-date models, some of them 5 years old now, have got more processing power than that rocket Starship, that mission to the moon. And that's next to people's heads while they're sleeping, that's in children's rucksacks, that's being played with toddlers sometimes. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that is wrong or bad. I'm saying it's definitely a point of reflection. And we as a community, a human community, have to ask ourselves, are we happy with this? Where are we going and to what end?
Well, before we change the subject, I'd just like to pose a question to all of you who are listening. And I'd like you to think, and I don't think you'll have to think very deeply, how many of you, and this includes myself, have actually apologised to the robot when you said something wrong.
Oh.
So it's a lighter note to change it, because I'm sure you I have.
Yeah.
And I've also ticked that I am not a robot.
Yeah.
So
isn't that weird? And
unbelievable.
How many people
really
have got that wrong when you've got like 8 squares or something like that, and you have to... How many of these squares do not have a traffic light in them? Or how many of these squares do not have a motorcycle in them? And you're clicking them away and it tells you you've got it wrong. And you're thinking, oh my word, do I not even know what a motor... Or you're looking at one particular square where there's maybe a few millimeters of a tyre of a motorcycle or the very edge of a traffic light.
And you question yourself.
And you're wondering whether, and you're taking it upon yourself as if it's some sort of test. Well, it is a test, I suppose, but it speaks about our ability to be able to differentiate. And you think, oh, wow, it's taken, oh, yeah.
I think it's taken away. I mean, I wonder now how many of us would pass intelligence tests like we used to have.
I'm saying nothing.
11, I'm saying nothing either. The 11 plus used to only be an intelligence test.
Yeah, you told me about
now,
this, yeah.
So that was an intelligence test.
Yeah.
But we were talking, I don't know what I was doing. I was doing something, and I was talking about being dyslexic. I think I was talking about balancing on watching something on telly. I think I was talking about balancing. And it started James and I talking about autism. And I was saying, I wonder if I said, I know if I'd been tested as a child, I did have dyslexic. I was dyslexic, still am very dyslexic. But nobody ever knew. And I was talking about that to James. And I wonder if I had known, would I have succeeded in my life? I do wonder whether I would have succeeded, because.
Are you based on the premise that you see yourself as succeeded now, or that you would have succeeded more if you'd been diagnosed?
No, wouldn't more, because I would have been diagnosed and I would have thought there was a problem.
I see.
Whereas because I'm dyslexic with both letters and numbers.
Yes.
And in my careers that I've had, I've had to use both of them. And in the last career I had was teaching. So I had to adapt very quickly. I had to learn to adapt.
Yes.
So whether it was when I was nursing or doing orthodontics or teaching, I had to adapt the way I thought and the way I put things down.
Yes.
So did that make me brighter in a way? Because I had to adapt and I didn't have a label.
Yes.
Because if I had the label, would I not have tried as hard?
That's interesting. Well, it's hypothetical, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and we're looking at alternate history there, of which we don't have a proof, but it's fascinating to reflect upon it. I sense by posing it as a question like that, a point of speculation really, the answer you feel is maybe not. That having to find your own way and develop the skills in relationship to your abilities brought out strengths in you. And I do think that's something that's very important. We often see, or it's often put, or the stigma of having anything like dyslexia, dyspraxia, and other neurodiverse ways of being in terms of how we all operate, how we all think, how we all act, who we are in relationship to ourselves and the world around us, is often seen as either a weakness or a barrier or some sort of need. And obviously in an old money, a special need, but maybe it's a strength in another way, and we're not focusing on that because we're labelling what's perceived and with stigma to be the weakness. And people don't talk about it like that. People talk about it as if it's a strength. And in the sincerity of it, it often is a strength. But maybe you're right, maybe it is a barrier that's placed on children, young children at times, and adults as well, as an unnecessary label. I mean, it's an interesting point of conversation, and I think there are pros and cons for both. But I do think you're right. We're not allowing individuals to flourish and flower naturally based on what just comes out of them. We are maybe the point is that we are fixating on labelling rather than allowing the behaviours to follow and accentuating the positives, playing to the strengths, developing each individual in what is natural and true and good that comes out of each individual. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me. I think the interesting thing for me, because obviously when you're born with, and it's not even a disability, is it? It's just the way it's in. For me, it's the way my brain works.
Yes.
My brain doesn't work quite the same. It's only a computer, the brain anyway. But it doesn't work. Same with the phone. You can press the wrong letter and everything goes. So yes. So for me, I'm an avid reader, as I've said before, and reading has never been a problem. So obviously the way I see words is different than anybody else because I can't write them down. But it's never stopped me.
Yes.
Because I still can read.
So it's the resilience and the development of the character and self-belief, self-confidence to be able to not be limited by anything or anyone. I mean, obviously,
Yes.
I'm talking with an air of poetic license there, but it's that inner knowing, that inner belief that we need to instill and grow within children.
Yes.
That don't fixate on what potentially is wrong. Focus on what can be right. Focus on what you can do. It's the yes I can attitude. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes,
It's creating a positive mental attitude. It's creating an attitude to life that is forward thinking and a sense of can do.
I think for our next time,
Have I understood you correctly?
You have understood me correctly, and I think
Yeah.
for next time, what you've actually just said involves personal responsibility.
Yes.
And next time we talk, I think we can go into personal responsibility
Okay.
of how we are all responsible for our own actions.
Okay, that's
in
very
life.
interesting.
So I think next
Yeah.
time we'll be able to talk about
Thank
that.
you. Well, thank you. Well, I didn't know, genuinely didn't know what questions or what was going through Anne's mind. I think it's fair to say none of us know, even Anne from any second to any other second, as to what that may or may not be this morning. I mean, that's been quite an impassioned, I wouldn't say heavy, but quite an impassioned Sunday morning conversation there about something that obviously has touched on something of meaning there and concern. And I certainly got quite passionate in the middle there. And I hope everybody listening, you understand that you're all individuals, and I absolutely understand that we're having a conversation, and you'll have your own thoughts and ideas, and so you should. And you won't necessarily agree with us. You may or may not. It would surprise me if everybody listening doesn't agree at all. But we're encouraging a conversation, keeping the dialogue open, encouraging you all to think for yourself, to question, and to respectfully engage with each other. And if we can bring back that decency, that level of respect, we are going to start finding our way back and start bringing a healing to all of the deep divisions that are running across everything and everyone at the moment. So there isn't a prerequisite for everybody to agree or everybody to think the same. But what there is can we act respectfully towards each other? So I hope I haven't lost you with my impassioned soapbox rant somewhat in the middle there. I've got a couple of points which I think are interesting. And I did find these, and because you've spoken about it this morning, it has fit nicely together. And there is more information that you can find on this. But a couple of schools in the UK have actually taken it upon themselves to ban phones, in schools. So we've got Forge Valley High School in Sheffield, which has banned smartphones, watches and headphones. And there's also William Ransom Primary School in Hitcham, Herefordshire. As a school, they've asked 25 primary schools in the town to join them in requesting parents to not buy their children smartphones. So there is an appetite for this, at least in a minority of schools, and maybe that will grow. And many of you are parents and grandparents listening to this. So you can find out some more information. So both of those schools have come from articles on the BBC News website or app, and you can find more information about that there. And that might give you a point of reference or a point of conversation, a point of reflection, something to agree or disagree with. But it's certainly very, very interesting. Okay, we'll leave it there, Anne, do you think?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, well, I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday or a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you for tuning in. And as always, if you have any questions or suggestions, comments, feedback, anything, we'd love to hear from you. Oh, that was, catch my breath at the end of that one. So I've already said that, haven't I? Have a lovely weekend, everybody. And we look forward to speaking with you, to being with you next Sunday. We'll see you then. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.